Welcome to the committee meetings for February 22nd. Our first committee is Planning, and Jean Knudsen is the chair.
Thank you. We have one item on our agenda, and with me on the committee is Dan Hamill and April Barker. We have a review of the population employment growth forecasts from Whatcom County. Greg.
Good afternoon, Council. Greg Ockett, Planning and Community Development Department. Let me bring you up to speed. A little background. Last fall, the City Council approved recommendations to the county for population growth forecasts, employment growth forecasts, and UGA boundary. That's work that we need to do to update our comprehensive plan. So the City Council sent recommendations to the county. One of the interesting things about GMA is that the county makes the final decision on these issues. In terms of the growth forecasts, UGA boundaries, the county makes the final decision. So your recommendations for the mid-range population growth forecast and the high-range employment growth forecast and no changes to the UGA boundary were sent to the county last fall. In January, the County Planning Commission completed their review of your recommendations and recommended something entirely different. They recommended the high growth forecast and additions to the UGA boundary. Those recommendations were transmitted to the County Council, and 2 weeks ago, the County Council, by a vote of 6-1, voted to recommend a number that was between the mid-range forecast that the city recommended and the high-range forecast that the County Planning Commission recommended. So the mid-range number is 31,050. That's an increase over the city's recommendation of about 2,600 people.
Greg, could you give me the high, I asked you before, the high number that was?
The high number was about 36,000.
Okay.
The county's, or the city's recommendation was 28,400. The County Council landed on 31,050. They did that primarily at the recommendation of county staff, who were concerned that the capacity in our city and UGA exceeded the recommended growth forecasts by more than 5%. When you look at what we have capacity for and compare that with the mid-range population growth forecast, we had about 15% more capacity than what we would need using the mid-range forecast. And I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at you, but they selected the 31,050 number primarily because they were concerned that if we have an excess of capacity, we could be subject to challenge, and they could be subject to challenge. So county staff recommended we reduce that excess capacity down to about 5%, which seems to be what hearings boards are comfortable with, and that's how they came up with the 31,050 number. We're here today seeking your direction, your approval to use that number rather than the number that you previously approved, the 28,000 number. We think the 31,000 number is probably a good compromise between what the city recommended and what the County Planning Commission recommended. Having the same numbers in both the city and the county plans are important, and since the county has made this decision, and I should point out that it is a preliminary decision. They won't make the final decision until they adopt their comprehensive plan in June or July. But we need numbers because we're updating our plans. All of the cities, all of the jurisdictions are updating their plans, so we need to know what numbers we're dealing with, and that's why they took this sort of preliminary vote. So again, we're seeking your guidance, your approval to use the 31,000 number. That number does not mean that we may need to make any changes to our UGA. The boundaries all stay the same. And so the impact on us is relatively minor in terms of going from 28 to 31. It's relatively a minor impact.
Okay, committee, April.
So originally when I watched all this on TV, when this decision was made, the interesting part is it was said time and time again, this won't impact, we won't have to change any zoning in current neighborhoods. So with this new number, are we staying with that?
Yes, we will not have to change any zoning in any neighborhoods. We have capacity for that 31,000 number.
And the number that they've chosen, it's like almost right in half of was it about 8,000 more would have caused us to have, or what the number was for the 35,918 to go to the higher?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And what was the amount, like, was it almost 32,000 that our city, if we weren't to change any zoning and we were just to stay within, what's the max that we can do without?
32,000 and change, yes.
Okay.
That's our capacity.
And with these changes, did you do any new calculations to find out about the employment? Because it seems that if we're going to go about half with the employment.
The
since-
employment numbers, the employment numbers did not change.
Yeah.
They approved the forecast that we recommended. We have capacity for that employment number as well.
Okay, so you went over those numbers and
Yes.
decided.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, nothing?
No, I just was going to ask the employment question that Councilwoman Barker just asked. I'm going to move to approve.
Okay. Before we vote, Michael?
Thanks. I don't want to slow your vote down, but I do have an observation and two questions. The observation is it's fascinating to hear why the county made their decision. They were arguing that we had too much parent capacity, and the only solution is either to up the population or reduce the UGAs, and they didn't want to do that. Whereas we've heard from some members of the advocating public that our capacity numbers are actually low. So that's just weird. We're getting two opposite pressures. My first question is, do we have a choice, or do we just kind of have to accept this as a planning number regardless? Is this really a choice? And then the second question is, I'm really concerned with how the county applied their formula for the residential capacity in the unincorporated areas. They set early on a policy that 15% of the growth would be in the unincorporated areas. The problem is when you increase the numbers in the cities, it increases the size of that 15%. By upping our numbers 2,650, if the county applies the 15%, they're also adding 400 new people in the unincorporated areas, and I've heard no one speak in favor of adding more residential capacity in unincorporated areas. So how have they handled the effect of this increase on the unincorporated areas due to that formula?
If I could respond first to the issue of choice, and I'll let my colleague respond specifically to the rural issue. City always does retain a choice. We can continue to plan with the numbers that were adopted by council as a recommendation. However, there will be a risk of appeal to the hearings board, largely because we don't establish the final numbers, and we would likely be challenging the county on the additional population. Since there really is no functional change nor significant cost difference, we don't think the costs associated with an appeal, the risk associated with pursuing it are warranted at this time, at least is our recommendation. And we'd suggest that it would be appropriate to act on the recommendation, or at this point, it's a recommendation, soon to be policy on their adoption by the county council.
And Mike, they did not discuss the impact on the rural areas, at least to date they have not discussed how this change impacts the growth forecast for the rural areas.
Pinky?
Just a quick question. I've always supported the higher numbers, so I don't have any problem with that. I'm just wondering if we thought about revisiting looking at our UGAs or maybe the properties that are in reserve, and if we want to examine opening that up a little bit at all.
I would caution the council at this point in that we would be unable to meet our statutory deadline because we've already started to process materials for that. Additionally, I'd ask you to be advised by a presentation later this afternoon that deals with the future cost of level of service. By expanding the UGAs, we would increase the need for us to meet that level of service outside the city, and we're not ripe for that until we figure out how to solve that cost issue.
April and Terry?
Rick, will you fill me in? I remember, because I'm coming into this a little bit later, but you had mentioned there would be a discussion that we would have about UGAs once this went through, and a plan to come forward, because it sounds like there's been some teeter-tottering over the years on where the city was moving with UGAs. Is that something?
Yes, that's a very good point. We intend, as our first work product, immediately upon adoption of the comprehensive plan, to look at all the UGAs to solve exactly that capacity and cost issue. Come up with tools that would address them so they could come in an orderly basis and we'd be able to maintain our level of service into the future. That's what separates us now from from any potential expansion, and you'd hear staff say that repeatedly, is we really don't have a plan to deal with the financial implications of extending services. While proponents of development will pay their fair share of cost, the existing deficiencies are so great, and the entire city would bear the burden. It would divert a lot of the resources we might need for urban villages, for example, to the rural areas. Not saying it couldn't be done, but as you'll hear later through the presentation, we need to take some actions to make sure we can do it.
Thank you.
Terry.
Yeah. I kind of applaud the county council for the numbers that they chose. I mean, this is right within the range that we originally asked for. It's a little bit higher than what we decided on, but it's right within the range. And, you know, I applaud them for these numbers. I think it works well with us. I can't see any reason why we would want to reject these numbers. It wouldn't make any sense to me at all with that, and because it's right basically what we were asking for. So I think they did a good job with coming up with it, and I will definitely support it.
Okay, Roxanne.
Similarly, I have been a major supporter of the high numbers because I don't think you'll get the job development and the job creation unless you have the development that will support through the high population numbers. I also appreciate that the county council came up with something in between all the extremes that we have to hear about from our community. But we need to be doing this proper development in our city so we can be the county seat, so we can have the kind of employment that our community needs. This will help reduce rent. This will help reduce the cost of housing. This will help our communities in so many ways. So I hope the committee will support it, and I look forward to doing the same.
I feel the same way also, but I do believe as soon as we can, as soon as this comp plan work is done, we really take a serious look again at U Street and Cordata, because I think that should be there. I understand with the number situation. Now, I'm not going to argue with what the county council did either, so as soon as we get done with our work here, then I think we should look at those two areas again.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to reiterate that I will be agreeing with this, but because of the promise of this discussion that we've been saying all along we're going to have, so I'd hope that would come immediately after. Thank you.
Okay, motion been made and seconded. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, motion carries. In the committee,